Hi, welcome back. In part one, we looked at this shot and added some muzzle flashes, and we also looked at the relighter. In part two, we are going to be adding a second muzzle flash to this shot here. These are H&K G36C assault rifles. As you can see, I've already put a muzzle flash for this one on the right, and we're going to add one for this one on the left. I'm also going to add some petals and some randomness, some sparks as well, and finally we're going to look at matching the grain, which is sort of the final step in the compositing process. So I've got one instance module already applied with my position, aim and trigger keyframes. So in order to add a second flash, there's no need to add another bang and go through all this process of choosing your flash shape and properties. You can just add another instance. So you can either duplicate this flash instance here, but then you'd get all its keyframes, or you can use the module selector to add a second instance. So I'm just going to do that, and we get our second flash drawn in the middle of the screen, and that comes down here. Bang flash instance 2. So I have already put some markers on this layer, so I know where to put the flash for this particular gun. So I'm going to go ahead now and add the keyframes necessary to get this one firing. So I'll probably put that on fast forward, so I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I think we can tweak the positions a bit bit later on if we need to, but for now I think that looks pretty good. So the first thing I want to do is add some petals. The petals are the star-shaped flashes that you get with assault rifles, and it's really straightforward to add in Bang. In the flash builder, you have this section here called petals, and you can just choose a configuration 1, 2, 3, which is like a upside down T, or this propeller shape, 4, 5, 6 and 8. This particular gun has got 4 ports, and they face up and down and left and right rather than diagonally like this. So we can quickly adjust that by changing this roll setting here to 45 degrees, which will put them in the correct orientation. We have to do that for both, like so. And then we can play around with our shape profile to get it looking a bit more like we want. So at the moment I think they're a bit long. I'm not so keen on this particular shape. Let's go through the different shape presets for the petals. I think that one's quite nice. Make them a tiny bit thinner, and just play around with their settings a bit. So this angle setting here points them forward or points them back, and it's probably wouldn't be wise to have petals that pointed back. Pretty dangerous, I imagine. I think these ones would point pretty much straight up actually. So let's just try slightly off axis there, about 85 degrees, and we can make them a lot less bright or more bright than the main flash, and I think these are going to be a little bit less bright. Let's try that there, see what that looks like. Okay, so the next thing I want to try is adding some randomness. If we look at this, the flash doesn't change that much. The petals look pretty similar all the way through. The actual instances themselves have their own unique random seed. So no two flashes that are on at the same time will look exactly the same, but we can dial in a bit of randomness using our randomization parameters down here, just to try and make things look a little more realistic. So there are three randomization parameters. The first one randomizes the main shape, including the length of the shape, the age of the flash. So you can look at the user manual for a bit more information about that. But it also mixes between the shape profile that you've chosen here and the various built-in profiles that it will mix between during randomness. So if I start at 0, this uses the this profile shape here. If I increase this, you'll see the shape changing a bit. Now, it doesn't happen every time. It may very well use the this shape profile, but chances are much higher as this gets more towards 100 that it will use a different shape. So if I show what that looks like, you can see this this shape is changing quite dramatically. And we can do a very similar thing with the petals as well. So if I ramp that up to 100, you see the petals changing shape quite a lot, and I don't really like that in this case, so I'm going to bring that down to about 50, and I'm also going to do that with the shape as well, maybe about 60, so we don't get completely crazy with our shape changing there. And finally, we've got our brightness randomization, which is exactly as it sounds, really. This just makes certain frames a bit brighter or certain frames a bit dimmer. So just for maximum randomness, I'm going to put that right up to 100. So each instance also has its own randomness override and random seed. Let me just show you what happens. Random seed is like you'd find in any plugin that has Perlin noise style effects here, like Trapcode, for example. If you just change the random seed, you'll see the shapes changing as I scrub that value there. You've also got this randomness override, which when at 100%, this means it will take on these values. And when it's at 0%, it will mean that there's no randomness. So if I press play now, it'll go back to the way it was before we dialed in that randomness up here. So I think I'm going to leave that at 100% and maybe just take this one down a little bit, just so they're a tiny bit more different. And I may just scale Gene's gone up a little bit here. This is from a short film that I directed just before Christmas called Disable Enable. And we were using a strobe light here, a sound activated strobe light. So these guns were mechanical, they made a clicking noise when the trigger was pressed, and that activated the strobe light and gave us the interactive lighting, so there's no need for us to use a relighter in this shot. Cool, so let's take a look at that. Nice. So the last two things I want to do are to add some sparks and also to do some grain matching. This is pretty grainy plate. If I zoom into the full resolution here, you can see we've got like lots of grain here and not so much there, where our flash gets a little bit dimmer. So I'll tackle that in a minute. For now, I'm just going to add some sparks. I'll zoom in a little bit here. We've got these settings here, so I can add up to 100 sparks. This is the maximum number of sparks that you'll get. It's not the exact number of sparks. Again, it's a random thing, so from frame to frame it will change the number of sparks that get rendered. I don't think we need that many, so I'm going to just use about 50. The dispersion, again, is a maximum dispersion, so this is 20 degrees from the axis. And that looks way too high, so I'm going to So bring that down to about 10 degrees. And obviously spark brightness is how visible they are. I think this effect works best when it's relatively subtle, so let's just try it at 25% and see how that looks. Yeah, there you go. Zoom out to see the whole picture. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now all I want to do is to do some grain matching. Let me find a frame where we can see something like that there. If I zoom right in. Quite a grainy looking plate, but where we've got the dimmer areas of the flash, we don't have any of this grain. Now Bang can help you out with that, but it doesn't have its own grain matching algorithms or anything like that. Instead, it relies on your preferred grain plugin of choice on a 50% grey solid, and it uses that to overlay with the alpha channel of the flash, and you can mix in the amount of grain that you want to match. And in order to do that, we've got this utility script here underneath the utilities drop down here on the Bang module selector, add grain pre-comp. So if I click that, that will create a pre-comp, bring it into this comp with the eyeball switched off. And if we open that up, we've got the same size comp. We've got the original plate here as a guide layer, so you can actually go through each channel and match the grain individually, and it adds the add grain effect to this grey layer here. Now I find this quite slow, so for this demo I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to add noise and grain noise and just push it up a bit so that we can see what's going on. That'll probably be sufficient for this. Back in our comp, we find our Bang render module, and down here it's got the grain drop down. We can choose our grain pre-comp and mix the grain. So as you can see, if I mix that down to 0, you can't see any grain as I mix it up. The grain appears. So it's unlikely we'd see anything in these very bright areas anyway. I'm just going to mix that up to about there. That looks pretty good. And that just helps to sit the flash into the shot a little bit better. It's really the one of the last stages of the comp that you'll go through, but I think it really helps just to help make that look a bit more realistic. And this is the final shot. Okay, so don't forget to check out the user guide, which you can download with the plugin. It goes into a lot more detail about everything than I can squeeze into a demo. Feel free to download the trial version. The best thing to do really is just to play around with it. Drop in some of the Flash Builder presets and mess around with them until you've got something that works for your shot. Have fun. Cheers, guys.